Let's meet someone who is revolutionising mental health through nutrition. I'm Kate Save. The Inspired CEO starts now. Welcome to The Inspired CEO, where each episode we explore the innovative wellness practices that are driving success and longevity in the modern business world. In this interview, we speak with Deakin Distinguished Professor Felice Jacka, OAM, a world-leading expert in nutritional psychiatry and director of the Food and Mood Centre at Deakin University. As the founder of the International Society for Nutritional Psychiatry Research, her groundbreaking work explores the powerful link between diet and mental health. She shares insights on her research, career journey, and the future of mental well-being through nutrition. It's such an honour to have you here today, Felice. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to be here.
Now, I must say, we've known each other for at least 5 or 6 years, thereabouts. And I was trying to catch up on everything that you've done in the last 5 or 6 years. And I think the list is never ending. There has been so much going on in your world. Tell me a little bit about, or tell our audience about, firstly, where you got started and how this all began.
Okay, so I grew up in a family that I guess was non-conventional, but as naturopaths, they really had a strong focus on food and nutrition as the foundation of health. Now, there were aspects of the way they came at things that was non-evidence-based, shall we say, and that I think really prompted me to dive deeper into food and nutrition, and probably as much around the politics, the environmental aspects of food, the ethical aspects, as well as the health aspects. But then I went on to study fine art. That was my first degree. But because I had, like many people, a personal experience of really quite severe common mental disorders, so that's depression and anxiety, they're called the common mental disorders, and that's for a very good reason. During my adolescence and early 20s, I became very interested in mental health. So I went back to study psychology. But while I was doing psychology, I realised that I wasn't terribly interested in, for example, becoming a counsellor, but I was very interested in the brain and in research in general. So then I segued into research and did a PhD. And in that PhD, I proposed to my supervisors that I would like to look at diet in relation to mental health. And of course, at that time, this is back in the early 2000s, we'd known for decades that diet and nutrition were really important to physical health, such as heart disease and diabetes. But psychiatry had always sort of been a separate discipline where it was only focused on what happened above the neck and the brain itself, and didn't really think about the human as a whole system, where of course food and nutrition is the foundation of virtually everything that happens in our body and brain. So I proposed my PhD topic because I was a senior, I was going to say a middle-aged student. Actually, I was a middle-aged student. I was sort of given free rein to sort of follow my own interest and passion, and sort of bringing together the field of nutrition research and the field of psychiatry research. And at that stage, there were a lot of new statistical techniques in nutrition research that allowed us to look beyond just individual foods or individual nutrients, which of course we don't eat just individual foods or nutrients, and look at the whole of someone's diet. And that in relation to people's mental health, and of course taking into account those things we need to consider, like people's economic status and education and other health behaviours, and their body weight, which people often think that the body weight is somehow involved in this link between diet and mental health, but it's not. This link exists at any level of weight. So we really don't talk about body size.
Yes, and that makes perfect sense. If you're seeing eating disorders on the other end of the spectrum, there's obviously disturbances in the gut microbiome and mental health there. And
yeah,
then
well,
on
like in
both-
most things in the body, everything else in life, really, it's a bi-directional relationship and it's complex. So I would say eating disorders, and I mean, we do a bit of eating disorder research. Eating disorders really focuses on how mental health affects what we eat, whereas nutritional psychiatry, which is what we lead, focuses on how what we eat influences mental health. So it's thinking about it a different way. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So I guess you're most well known, the biggest study that most people in the world that are in the health area should know about, and if they don't, they need to look it up, is the SMILES trial. And I think the acronym for that's incredible. What does that acronym stand
Oh,
for?
crikey. Now you've got me. I really couldn't tell you.
That's okay.
I work with an amazing woman within the Food and Mood Centre, Professor Adrian O'Neill, and before ChatGPT, she was the master of the acronym generation in our
it's
centre.
so good because the name...
Supporting mental health through lifestyle modification, something like that.
Well, the acronym says it all though. So it's how do we improve our mood through food?
That's exactly right. And so when I did my PhD, it was what's called an epidemiological study. That's where we're not running an experiment. We're just collecting data from large groups, in this case women, and on their diet, on all those other factors I mentioned, and doing psychiatric assessments, and then using statistical processes to bring those data together and test the hypothesis that what women ate habitually was related to their mental health. When you start to go into experiments, that's a whole different thing. So the work I did in epidemiology established, and this is a good, quite a few years before I did the SMILES trial, that the quality of our diets is related to either the presence of or the risk for depression in particular, but also anxiety in many cases. And this is the case right across the life course. So everything from your very early life nutrition, so what your mother ate during pregnancy, children's diets through the first few years of life, adolescence diets, which is really important because this is the primary age of onset for mental disorders.
I heard it was 50%, one of your statistics.
Yeah, half of all mental disorders start before the age of 14.
That is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing.
So what it's saying is if we want to prevent some of these, we need to focus on identifying risk factors that we can modify, because so many risk factors for mental disorders are difficult to modify. You know, things like our genetics, early life trauma, life stress, poverty, these sorts of things. They're hard to change. Diet and physical activity are things that we can modify, and we know that they're really important in our risks for mental health. And then right across to the other end of life, you know, as we get older, some people will develop depression, anxiety for the first time as their brain ages, as, you know, their lives change. And we see that diet quality is really related to that as well. So we get all that from the epidemiology. We see this link right around the world, whether we look in Norway or Brazil or China or Japan. This link exists such that if people have a healthier diet, regardless of all those other factors, body weight, income, all those things, they are about 30 to 35% less likely to develop depression. And when it's been studied, there's a reduced risk of anxiety as well, particularly if the diets are high in whole food. So it's not like they have to be a specific type of diet, but it's diets that are high in lots of different sorts of plant foods, fish, you know, unprocessed foods, and then, of course, low in ultra-processed foods.
Yes, and I think there's a couple of key things there is the ultra-processed foods being the absolute number one killer of good health. And the second one really being that it's not one particular food or one particular diet. And for every fad diet out there, there's goods and bads about them. So overall, you've got to chuck them out and start again. And even if you ask young children, what's good for you to eat. They're the ones that can tell you the truth because they know, I should eat my vegetables. That's about it. That's what they know, and that is true, and that's always been true. Yeah. However, you ask an adult, they've got no idea what they should be eating because they're so confused by the media messages and the ketos and the carnivore diets and whatever else is out there, and they're all about cutting out and then supplementing with synthetic things. Just eat food.
Well, that's the thing, and I think it's largely industry and the profit motive that drives that misinformation, whether it's people selling diet books or the processed food industry itself really acting to quite deliberately confuse people. Yeah. You mentioned kids knowing that they should eat their veggies, but in Australia, even though we have access to such fantastic food, less than 1% of toddlers get the recommended intake of vegetables, less than 4% of adolescents, and teenagers in Australia eat on average 7 serves of junk food a day.
Wow. Now, something that is a real bugbear of mine, you gave a stat in one of your interviews about, taxing bad foods and sugar and those sorts of things. And you said, well, alcohol's taxed at 400%, but soft drinks are only taxed at 10%. That outraged me. You made another statement about the cost of, the ultra-processed foods causing illness at how many trillion? 13 trillion or something like that.
So it's actually cigarettes that are taxed at 400%. Like, it's massive. And someone told me the other day how much it costs to buy a packet of cigarettes. And I nearly fell over. It was like, I don't know, half of someone's rent. Like, it was a crazy amount.
Yeah, right.
But we can't even get that 10% tax across the board because of the power of the lobbyists. And this is a really big issue in Australia, as it is across much of the Western world. And we know that those sort of taxes, they do actually work. But if you look at the whole global food system, so this includes everything from the way food is grown, so agriculture and, for example, things that intensive agriculture, monocropping, intense tilling, application of fertilisers, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, it's destroying the soil, the microbiota of the soil, and I can talk about that later, up to right through to the other end, which is the retail and the big ultra-processed food sellers, and we don't need to say who they are, but the supermarkets as well. That whole system costs the planet at a bare minimum $20 trillion a year. 20 trillion. Now, more than half of that is the cost to human health, because poor diet is actually, across most of the world, the leading cause of illness and early death, both directly but indirectly through its impact on chronic disease and things like high blood pressure and high blood glucose. And at the same time, that whole industrialised food system is the leading cause of biodiversity loss. So not just through land clearing, but also, and the loss of species, etc., that goes with that, but the loss of the microbes in the soil, which is so critical to our microbial diversity, and also in the air, which mainly comes from the soil, that is having a really nasty impact on health, we think, but we haven't been able to start measuring it yet because it's such a new field.
I must say, I'm absolutely mind blown at the range that is now in the supermarkets. There is an expectation, literally, that if you want to eat healthy, you need to make it yourself in the supermarket. And I experience this firsthand when I've spoken to some of the big chains about their selection of ready-made meals in the freezer section. And I was told specifically that people don't want health. And I'm like, well, why do they all promote health? No, they just want what's cheapest and what's the best value and the biggest meal and the lowest cost per gram, which is white rice or pasta or fillers and colours and machine pumped food. And I said, that's odd, because when I ask people what they want quick and easy healthy food, they want it made in Australia, they want Australian labour used. And I thought, how can you make a $3 or $4 meal and sell it in the supermarket with a margin if a human has actually touched it and been paid any labour, or if it has any real food ingredients? I analysed over 50 products in the frozen section in ready-made meals across all of the supermarkets, and I did not see a particular, there was, like you said, 3 to 5 brands that make everything. And there wasn't a particular meal there that really met the nutritional requirements of the 40% of the population that might have insulin resistance or some sort of chronic health condition. So they either didn't have enough vegetables or didn't have enough protein or were full of the things they shouldn't be full of, the sugars and the sodiums, and we talked about emulsifiers this morning, full of things that were non-food ingredients, and it was absolutely shocking. And when I asked about this, they said that's not what people are looking for. Well, they can't look for it because it's not on the shelf. It actually doesn't exist. So we think we're making a healthy choice, but we're not presented with options that are actually healthy. And that is 70% of the supermarket is packaged food. And we think we're picking the best, but we're picking the best from this end of the range, not from whole food to ultra-processed. We're looking at an ultra-processed range predominantly.
Yeah. In America, 70% of their whole food supply is ultra-processed food.
Oh now, my goodness.
Yeah, and I mean in Australia, I think about 42% of our dietary intake is ultra-processed, but in the US and the UK, it's average about 60, but in some sectors of the population it's far higher. So
can you define that for people, ultra-processed?
Yeah, so it actually has a particular definition based on what's called the NOVA system, and this was developed in Brazil by colleagues of ours, Carlos Monteiro and his group. And basically you've got you at one end of the scale, things that are completely unprocessed, like an apple or a carrot. At the other end is ultra-processed, and ultra-processed is made up of things, I don't say food. There's components that used to be food, maybe once was some soy or some corn or something like that, but it has been very heavily processed and then reconstituted, and generally it might have added fibre or added vitamins or minerals, or it might even say low sugar because it's got artificial sugars in it. It will have emulsifiers, it will have preservatives, it will have flavours, it will have colours. And people often won't know or recognise that it's ultra-processed without really looking carefully at the box. And in the US, these pre-packaged meals that are often ultra-processed, people will go, well, that's a pasta meal with some, sauce.
But it can still say whole grain on it, which blows my mind because people go, no, I only eat whole grain foods. But they've purchased an ultra-processed food, which is counterintuitive because they've been taught one thing but marketed something that's the complete
Well, just below ultra-processed is a category called processed, and processed is often things like supermarket breads and things. Now, some of them can be quite healthy, so we don't have a problem with that. It's just this ultra-processed category. It's just that this has become the norm in so many Western societies. It's what we see everywhere, so it's ubiquitous. It's very heavily marketed. It's very cheap because it costs very little to put together, as you noted. And really importantly, it's become just sort of socially normalised, and people have come to expect that they can just go to a supermarket and buy something very quickly for dinner. And, we're time poor and there's a big cost of living crisis. So I totally get it. But what I think we need to be aware of is that we need to change this system because it's killing us and it's killing the planet.
The cost of health crisis.
Yeah, the cost of health crisis. And it's a bit like climate change because it's slow acting. People have sort of gotten used to that idea and they don't even notice the fact that we're living with such huge rates of disease. But what we're seeing now since the 80s is really rapid increases and really remarkable increases in the level of allergic diseases in kids. So things like asthma, eczema, we're seeing increases in autoimmune diseases. So things like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, celiac disease, things that all of these things are linked to our immune system. Now, the microbes that live in our gut, they, when we're born and in those few critical days, weeks and months of life, they really train our immune system. Now, our microbes and children's microbes are really not what they used to be, we think. Now, I just say that this is still a very evolving and early area of research, but there's a huge amount of research going on around the world to understand this. because you've got microbes children are getting from their mums or not getting. So their mums' microbes are not particularly healthy or diverse. That is influencing the way they develop, and we think their brain development as well.
And there's an impact from the father here at some point?
Well, we're less clear about that.
Okay.
We do think that epigenetics obviously is important, and that food seems to play a very important role in epigenetics, but it's just a much more, it's a very early area of research, so we can't say for sure.
Okay.
But the microbes of mothers' guts, they are, so what gut microbes do essentially, they're there to break down the components of food that our human enzymes can't break down.
Yes.
So that's primarily plant fibre from complex carbohydrates, so from legumes, from whole grains, from vegetables and things like this, but then also these phytochemicals. People know them often as antioxidants.
Yes.
Polyphenols. These are called phytochemicals or secondary metabolites. They're produced by plants, and they seem to play a very important role in health. Now, researchers now believe that there may be as many as 150,000 different types of phytochemicals.
Right.
We've evolved to interact with these so that they talk to receptors in our body, and this really informs health. It informs the foods that we choose to eat.
Yes.
And we know that the microbes in our gut, that's food for them as well, in the same way that fibre is. When they break down polyphenols and they break down fibre, they produce thousands of different molecules. And it's these molecules that do all of these things in our system. One of the key things is our immune system, because 70% of our immune cells are actually in our gut.
Yes.
So when we have a microbial state in the gut, whether it's mum or infants and of course adults, it means that those microbes aren't able to do what they're supposed to do. If we're not eating fibre from plants, from whole plants, if we're not having polyphenols from whole plants, then our microbes can't produce all those thousands of molecules. Now, we believe that this is really feeding into this really massively increased burden of chronic disease. 25% of young people now live with a chronic health condition. So we're living longer, but we're less healthy because we're having foods that are really reconstructed, and that means they don't have the food matrix, they don't have all the micronutrients in the way that nature intended, and they certainly don't have, I think, a lot of those phytochemicals. And then, of course, they do have things like added emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners and things that we now know have an impact on the gut.
And even the synthetic vitamins and minerals that get added back to foods, all of that research now looking at, methylated folates and B12s and those sorts of things, and how if certain people take the synthetic forms that aren't methylated, the damage that that's causing in their bodies, and it's supposed to be bioidentical, but it's not, and those things can be doing more harm than good. So some of these synthetic supplements that people are taking, or foods that have had these synthetic things added back to them, could also be the cause of some of this. So,
this is a really interesting area of research. And for me, I have never taken a supplement. I mean, I take a vitamin D supplement, but that's about all really, because I think if you take anything out of its context, which is a food, a real food, then you don't know what you're messing with.
No, everything has a balance.
Everything is also has a very important role within the body. You take it out of the food matrix, out of it, all its friends, the other vitamins and minerals it's sitting with, you don't know what it's going to do. And we know from the research that very often taking supplements, vitamin mineral supplements, can actually be worse than placebo for mental health as well as for physical health, but for other health conditions as well.
Now, that link between food and mood, so we've touched on it a few times, but if someone is looking to follow a Mediterranean diet as per the SMILES trial and boost their mental health, what are the 5 key things they should be eating?
Well, it's actually really simple. So I always say that, the area of mental health, psychiatry, the brain, the brain is the most complex thing in the universe. the microbes that are really a key link between what we eat and our mental health and brain health, that is super complex. There's trillions of them. The way they talk to each other and the things they do, and we haven't even started to understand other microbes like viruses and fungi and all these things and how they work together. All of that is super complicated. But what you need to eat for health is actually super simple.
Great.
So it's lots and lots of plant foods.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean you have to be vegetarian, but lots of plant foods, real whole plants.
So go to the market.
Yeah, exactly. A real diversity of plant foods.
Yes.
And a diversity of whole foods in general, because the more diverse your diet, the more diverse your microbes. And that means they're more resilient.
Excellent.
Then avoiding the ultra-processed foods as much as possible. And then I always say, throw in fermented foods, because even though the research in the area is very new, it really does look like fermented foods have a particularly important bang for buck for health. And that's where bacteria and microbes are doing that fermentation, but they're doing it in a bottle or in a jar rather than in your gut. But they're producing molecules that we believe are really good for health. Now, what we didn't do was finish up about the SMILES trial, because of course this is very relevant. So the SMILES trial was the first scientific experiment. It was the first intervention where we thought, okay, if we take people with even really severe major depressive disorder, help them to improve their diet, will it improve their mental health? And nobody thought that it would, but we found that compared to social support, which we know is good for mental health, and it's often used as a control condition in mental health studies, people who got support from a dietitian, and this is key, we think, it needs to be a nutrition professional.
Okay.
Not just, say a research assistant or something like that, but proper support by a dietitian to improve their diet, increase the good stuff, decrease the bad stuff.
Yes.
Over 12 weeks, they had a remarkable improvement in their mood. Remarkable. And these are people, as I said, some of them were very, very ill. Most of them were on other forms of treatment. So they were antidepressants, psychotherapy, so it wasn't one or the other.
Yes.
But it was just really focusing, and it wasn't a weight loss diet. Nobody lost weight.
Yes.
But people experienced a very profound improvement in their mental health.
Wow.
Now, this has been shown now another 4 times. More recently, our team has shown that if people have diet and exercise support, it's as effective as gold standard psychotherapy delivered by psychologists.
Incredible.
So again, it's not saying one or the other. It's saying get the foundations right. Get movement and diet right.
Yes.
Everything else is going to work better from that. That's what I take away from this. And this is what is now in clinical guidelines by peak psychiatry bodies, is saying diet, sleep, movement, do that first and then build everything else on top of it.
I heard you call that step 0, which I loved. That before you get to step 1, get this right. I thought that's a key takeaway. So how do you look after your health? What do you do?
Oh, look, my health is really challenging. I've had cancer twice, breast cancer, and I had a double mastectomy in 2020. That's left me with quite a nasty pain condition that tends to fluctuate. So I tend to have to go in and out of exercise depending on what my body and my energy levels can do. But when I'm feeling good, I do lots of walking and hiking in nature. I love that. I do go to the gym and try and do some weights. But my food is really my focus. I'm not by any means a perfectionist about it, not at all. But I really love healthy food. I just usually start my main meal of the day with a big pile of leafy greens, and then whatever else is in the fridge in the vegetable section.
Absolutely,
Then some legumes, because I love lentils and chickpeas and things like that.
Yes.
And I'll often just make a soup or a stew, and my husband calls it gruel, but actually he really likes it because I put some whole grain pasta. I put all sorts of lovely spices and herbs. And I could eat that every day, but I also love yogurt and blueberries and all those things.
Yeah, my husband calls my virgin hodgepodge. Are we having hodgepodge again? It's just, and I'm like, we need to get 10 different veggies in there.
That's
We're going to
pretty
jam them
much
all
it,
in there.
yeah.
And then hidden tins of legumes. And I heard that you keep a whole, section in your pantry just with all your different coloured legumes.
I like the dried ones, and then, you just soak them with hot water for a couple of hours before, an hour before you cook them. And
Amazing.
Perfect.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on today. And this is the Inspired CEO. We'll be right back.